All right, we are live, episode 41 of Catch and Counter. Nibs, what's good, baby? A little bit of a slower week, but we got some good fights next weekend. And honestly, the Probox card was just the kind of card that is what our audience likes, to be honest.
Look, man, Probox does it again, bro. Top to bottom, clean card, a lot of action. You know what I mean? Some good back and forth. I don't know who's doing the matchmaking over there, but hats off to him, man. And Big Mouth YouTube, thanks for fucking with us, man.
As always, yes, much appreciated. If you're watching us live now, of course, we're happy to have you. If you're watching on, or I should say, listening on Big Mouth Radio Wednesdays at noon, we appreciate you guys as well. Um, let's get into, I guess, kind of the headliner of this week in boxing, and maybe if you're an American fight fan, it wasn't as significant. But if you're into the UK boxing scene as an American, or if you're in the UK following your local scene, Ben Whittaker is a pretty big deal. Now, I wasn't all that familiar with him, even as much of a boxing guy as I am. Really only seen him a couple of times. I knew of his amateur pedigree, but I never saw him fight in the amateurs. He comes out and gets it in what was apparently his matchroom debut, gets a knockout in a minute and a half over a clearly overmatched opponent, albeit one with a pretty impressive record on paper. And when you don't know enough about or you don't know that much about the opponent, sometimes it's a little tough to gauge what exactly it is that you're looking at. But just off of eye tests, there was a lot of things with Ben Whittaker that I really like. The speed and athleticism and the punching power for a guy like that at 175 pounds. There's definitely something to work with there. But give me your initial impressions of Ben Whittaker.
Look, man, I'll be honest with you. When he first came on the scene, I was one of those guys, kind of similar to you, man. I had to look him up, because he's got these highlight reels coming out, and he's only had like a handful of fights, but he's knocking guys out. And I mean, he's knocking guys out in spectacular fashion. Like, he kind of reminds me of a light heavyweight Prince Nassim, in Esh. Like let's be clear, there's only one Prince Nassim, but he's got that kind of style where he can hit you from any kind of angle. He's dodging punches, doing a little dance. He's got that showman shit on him.
He's got the
And
flair.
bro, and I love that. I love it when guys can put that shit on, but then back it up. You know what I mean? Like there's no point doing all the dancing if you're gonna get knocked out yourself. You know what I mean?
Gotta have
So
substance.
right. So the fact that he was out there closing the show and putting one on at the same time, I had to pay attention. We're talking about a silver medalist in the 2020, Olympic Games. And anybody, in my opinion, who gets a medal in the Olympics is, pretty good at what they do, right? So I've been a fan ever since, man, and I think he put on a hell of a show this weekend, and I think it was a statement because I think that his opponent thought he was on his level or was trying to make it seem like they were on the same level, and he had to make a statement like, "No, no, you're really not."
Well, listen, bro, I think, like you said, when you have an Olympic medal of any kind, it's an indicator of some level, right? There's a certain type of quality um, that is expected of you. And sometimes that pans out in the pros and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes guys can do the thing where they move really fast and they're just that good. If it's Lomachenko, if it's Andy Cruz, if it's Rigondeaux, you know, there's also the flip side of that, having a medal in it, even in his home country. Josh Buatsi had an Olympic medal and really took a long time to get to the big fights and hasn't exactly delivered in the big fights. And one potential comparison that I saw for Ben Whittaker was Josh Kelly. Because I remember when Josh Kelly first turned pro, I thought that kid was fucking spectacular. The hand speed, just how good he was as early as he was. I thought, well, the sky's the fucking limit for this guy. But he hasn't grown as much as I had hoped and expected, and has had challenging fights when he stepped up. Now he's got a great chance against Bakram Murtazaliev whenever that fight should happen, to kind of change some of that narrative. But sometimes, right, like guys that are really good early just kind of plateau out. I feel like there's so much in the air with Ben Whittaker because when you have a minute and a half fight, there's not much I can tell you. So I think there's a range of ways that this goes. We also have to look at the division he's in, right? Like with the exception of Beterbiev, there's like a strong top 10, but I think that there's plenty of guys in the top 20 that he could beat. And depending on how he looks against those guys, that'll kind of, affect how I feel about him in an elite level fight. But I think he's a great guy to have in the mix at this weight.
What do I say all the time, bro? Timing can mean a lot, right? If you have perfect timing in a particular weight class, you can become really famous really fast, right? And then you can also be a champion very quickly, right? Light heavyweight is starting to thin out again, right? I mean, yeah, they're top heavy at the 1 through 5, right? Is super talented. We were just talking about this, last week. Even with their gatekeeper, who's Anthony Yard at this point, right? We're still talking about a guy that's going to knock out just about everybody that isn't a champion. You know what I
Yep.
mean? So, and you have to respect him if you get into the ring with him, no matter how much talent you have. So, they're very top heavy at the top 5. I would probably say top 6 or 7 is really heavy. After
But
that, bro, it starts to get a little thin,
yeah.
and this is a perfect time for a guy like Ben Whittaker, who's got a pedigree, right? Anytime, like you said, you got a medal. There's a pedigree there for him to kind of come in and start cashing in on some of these bigger fights. But I tell you what, though, that knockout this weekend, woo!
Nah, it was spectacular. I just want to answer Jesus M real quick. He says, "Is Janibek versus Lara still happening?" Well, we don't know. We know that Janibek popped hot, and there isn't really any information other than that as to what's going to happen with the fight. We can only hope that it still happens. But if he, legitimately had adverse findings, he doesn't necessarily deserve the fight either. So we'll definitely keep our eye on that this week, and we'll try to give you a better, like, for real answer next week.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunate for Laura, because anybody who's a fan of this channel or just a fan of boxing, or has been around boxing for a long time knows, what Laura puts into his fights. You know what I'm saying? And he's very dedicated. I don't think there's ever been any kind of question of him ever popping dirty for anything. You know what
And
I
when
mean?
you
He's
get
always kind
older,
of
right,
focused.
Nibs, like how many
Yeah,
more times can you go through a camp for something to not happen? So like I said, hey Susan, we'll definitely keep our eye on that. Just to close out on Ben Whittaker real quick, talking about the top of the division, right? You got Beevil and Beterbiev, they have to settle their score. Benavidez is going to move up to cruiserweight. Um, and then so behind him, you have David Morrell, you have Callum Smith, you have Katayev. There's some guys, right? There's Callum Smith. I can't remember if I said him already. And
yeah.
then there's like that second crop of British guys too. Willie Hutchinson was very impressive a couple of months ago. There's Bawatsi, there's Craig Richards. I think that's more the level I want to see him in with. You know what I mean? Like I want to see him in with one of those high level, who's in the top 5 of the UK light heavyweight scene. How does he do against that classic guy?
And I think he set himself up to do just that. I mean, that's the whole reason for signing with Matchroom, right? Is to get those next level fights. Even though he was only 9 fights into his career, he's 10-0. You know what I mean? Um, so, you know, you think about it, a guy who's only 9 fights into his career is already playing chess. He's saying, "Hey, look, I'm 28 years old. Let's move this thing along." You know what I mean? He wants to be fighting for a title by the time he's 30, bro. And I think, again, making the move to Matchroom, getting guys with maybe a little bit better pedigree or better records. I don't know. I didn't know much about this Gavesi kid, but I tell you what, looking at his record, bro. I mean, he's got 2, 3 guys, with some winning records, on his ledger. Everybody else is
He's essentially
journeyman.
19-1 on a very regional scene.
Yeah. But you look at Ben Whittaker, he's already fighting contender type guys anyway, right?
Mhm.
So, and I think that has to do with the fact that, and I don't want to keep harping on it, but when you come from the Olympic world, you don't want to start fighting cab drivers, right? Because you've already been fighting some of the best guys in the world already. Let's face it, thousands of people apply for the Olympics. Only a handful make it to the rounds we all pay attention to, right? So the fact that he's already been on that level to a certain extent, why would you go backwards? So I think that he's on his way to fulfill his dream. He says he wants to be a world champion by 30. Why not, bro? At least get a shot.
Let's move over to Probox and my guy Justin Pauldo, who got a really impressive 8th round stoppage over Nick Theran. Tough opponent. Buzzed Justin early in the fight, but I saw Justin for the first time, or for the first time actually, when he lost to Miguel Madueño, and Madueño is a tough guy, but when he stepped up in class, he's also kind of lost as well. So it's a little tough to make of Justin after that performance. And then when he fought Shavkat Rakhimov earlier this year, I was really kind of blown away. We've seen Rakhimov, fight the best of his time at 130 pounds with Jojo Diaz, with Joe Cordina. There was a certain proof of level with Rakhimov, and Justin completely dominated him. And, in getting to talk to him after the fight, I just felt like, this is a serious guy. This is a serious athlete. And I feel like he proved it once again with Theran here. Again, hurt early in the fight, but able to get his feet up under him, I would say within like a minute or a minute and a half, and just stuck to his game plan, gradually started applying pressure to the pressure fighter, and got a beautiful stoppage win, made the guy quit in the corner.
I mean, and it was a legit stoppage too. I know a lot of people, might say, "Oh, well, he could have kept going." No, he didn't. He didn't. He either didn't want to, or he could not continue. Anytime your own cornerman, not the referee, right? Mind you, your own cornerman is having to lift your head up and say, "Hey, look at me. Do you want to?" And urging him to say something, and he sits there quietly. The fight's over, and hats off to his corner too, right? Because they recognize that. How many times have we seen that, and then they send the guy back out there anyway, right? To his demise. I think the corner recognized they knew who their guy was. They recognized, okay, yeah, this is it. Let's call it. Hats off to them. Hats off to the ref for stopping the fight. And I'll say this, man, we're talking about a guy who was 20-1, and he's heavy-handed as shit. The Nike Nick, whatever the hell you call his ass. Theran, he, like you said, he had Pauldo hurt, like in some trouble in that second round. And hats off to Pauldo. He did the veteran thing. He tied up. He knew who he was, right? Hey, I'm hurt. I'm
He
not the
was
guy
also
that's going
pretty
to fight through it.
slippery. He was also pretty slippery in that period. Like maybe a minute after he got hurt, his legs were still kind of messed up, but he kept moving, he kept smothering. And then he started making Theran miss again, and it gave him just enough time to get out of the round and actually get his legs under him.
Look, man, conditioning can save your life. You know what I mean? And you get into that autopilot, when your legs are gone, hey, you still got to, like you say, slip and weave, right? You got to keep on moving, because if you're not, well, that's how you get caught cold, and the fight's over. So, Theran was really close to ending this early. Hats off to Pauldo for, like you said, doing the things you're supposed to do. For me, I like the veteran move of holding when he had to, being able to, make Theran misses. And I think that Theran got a little too overexcited, right? I think he was trying to land the home run punch without setting it up. And that kind of, I think he set himself up to have the comeback that Pauldo did.
Well, and I think that Justin has some layers to his game. I think you got to be a little bit. You can't be so rudimentary in your approach. He's got a beautiful fucking jab. When he works behind his jab, I think he has one of the best jabs at lightweight right now. And he's getting stoppages right now. I know he doesn't have a great knockout percentage, but Justin is stopping, the best fighters that he's fought in his career. And whatever he's doing with Ronnie Shields, I think his fundamentals and his ability to adapt and stay composed. He's number 11 on BoxRec right now. I really do think this is a guy who's, right at a point where he's getting ready to crack that top 10. And I think if somebody in that top 10 is having a hard time having a hard time finding an opponent, I think that Justin should be their guy.
I think we it either gets overlooked or we don't talk about it enough. Is not just we say having a great jab is great business. I think anybody again who watches boxing understands that, but it's the layers to the jab, right? He's not throwing the same jab every time. He'll throw a soft jab out there, he'll throw a stiff one at you, then he'll change the levels on you. You know what I mean? Go low, go high. He'll keep you guessing, even with the jab, bro. And that's what at least maybe write me if I'm wrong, but I think that's where you're going. Where that's what makes his jab a beautiful thing to watch, is it's not the same thing over and over and over again. It's not super repetitive where you can kind of clock it. Okay, he hit me with the double tap here. He's gonna go here. Nah, he's switching it up, and then his offense changes, based on what you're doing.
And when he snaps it, it's a head
Great.
snapper. You know what I mean? When he really snaps that jab out, it is a head snapper. It is basically a power punch. So shout out to Justin Pauldo, man. I was definitely impressed. We're looking forward to seeing him back in the ring ASAP. That was a good win, tough fight for him. Couple fights I just want to quickly mention from this undercard. Our guy Muhammad Kuya Yaqubov got a draw with, and I'm going to try to find his name here real quick, with a veteran fighter that I had not seen, but they said that he started his career 2-5 and currently stands at 24-7-2. So he had some kind of career renaissance early in it. So it's always inspiring. Christian Cruz Chacon, they get a draw. I felt like it was a perfectly fair decision. Yaqubov, good as he always is, just wasn't really active enough at times and very effective defensively, but Cruz Chacon really had a very professional hustler's Mexican style. He knew how to stay busy. He knew how to do things from odd angles. And the more traditional Yaqubov kind of got, in my view, kind of got caught looking maybe a little bit too much, albeit even though he wasn't getting hit a lot, there was just long stretches of rounds where Cruz Chacon was kind of out hustling him. So love to see a fight like that. The other one I just want to mention real quick.
Before you move on real quick, I want you to repeat that man's record. Just want you to repeat that for those that are listening, right? Because 24-7-1 is right.
And two now.
And two now is what this fellow's record was. So, but coming into the night, he was 24-7-1, and a lot of people will look at that and go, "Well, he's just an opponent." Nah, man. We say this all the time. Some guys have to figure shit out the hard way on the job, right? Not everybody has the time to do the amateurs. Not everybody has, the money team behind them to get, all the practice, right, before you start becoming a pro. A lot of these guys are taking club fights. They're managing themselves. They're doing it the old-fashioned hard way, lunch pail kind of guys. And then, before you know it, they're 10 fights into their career. They might be 2-8, but then they get a guy or a gym or somebody that says, "Hey, come here, let me teach you some things." And now he's fighting on Probox and damn near getting a win, accounting of himself very well.
But against a legitimate,
we'll talk about it later, but that's exactly what you love about these stories, man.
And he did it against the legitimate top 15 guy. The only loss Yaqubov has is the Shock Foster, who we're going to get into shortly here. And Cruz Chacon, as they said on the telecast, he went pro when he was 16 years old. So that 2-5 happened when he was a literal child, and he just had to develop, as a professional when most fighters are developing as amateurs. And so not everybody's pro story is the same. The record is not always the whole story. Look at the story behind the record. So big ups to him. The last one I just want to mention was a tremendous fight. There was a couple on this card. I recommend you go watch the whole thing if you haven't. But Eric Badillo got a win over Elwin Soto at 108 pounds. Soto started to rise to prominence at like a similar time as Bam Rodriguez. And I remember thinking that they had some similarities and that they would probably fight one day. But then Bam, of course, becoming a generational talent. Soto, not quite getting there, but being a very good, solid contender, gives Badillo, the fight of his life, and Badillo able to use angles, just be a little bit more subtle and pull off the decision. But that was one of the best 108-pound fights I can remember seeing in a while.
I want to say something really quick because I know a lot of people might think that we get something for talking as glowingly as we do about Probox. We don't. We don't have any. We're not getting paid to advertise them. We don't get anything on the back end by kissing their ass or any of that shit, right? We just love boxing, and I want to point out the fact that even with some of these bigger cards, these pay-per-views that you see, and you'll see some of these bigger the names in these lower weight classes, you rarely see a fight from like 108, 115, those lower weight classes, which are all action, by the way. These are all action fights, but you rarely see them even with the guys that have names. Making these pay-per-view cards.
The guys with the star power are the only ones.
They've got to be a Nito Donaire. They've got to be a Monster in a way. They've got to be,
Bam.
Bam, etc. Right? And even then, they don't usually get to the main event. We were just talking about it last week. Bam was the main event. Let's be really clear. You know what I'm saying? But because he's the lower weight class, and what I'm getting to the point is Probox does a really good job of just putting on quality fights, bro. These lower weight classes, they get a lot of love on Probox TV, and it's great because it's free, guys. You can look and you don't have to catch it when it happens. A lot of these, cards like that are you'll have to pay for, or that are free on the internet. Once the card's over, you can't find it anymore. You have to know exactly who the fighter is to try to look him up. Probox, just type in Probox.
It's really just kind of made it so basic for me, where like DAZN, there's multiple paywalls. It's very expensive.
Right.
There's a ton of technical issues, both for the user and by the production. And Probox doesn't have any of that shit, bro. The technical shit is always relatively good. It's YouTube. There's only but so much that YouTube really fucks up, and I don't pay anything for it. And if I want to support Probox for the ad-free version, it's $1.99 a month. They just make it easier to be a boxing fan, and they're doing the kind of matchups where if you're a boxing guy, that's the shit that gets me going. Seeing a star fighter fight a fight that I know they're gonna win, that doesn't do it for me, bro. That really doesn't do it for me, and they don't really give you much of that.
And whether you're a fan, like and the point that I was trying to get to is, whether you're a fan of the lower weight classes, the middleweight classes, the heavyweights, no matter what weight class you want to watch, they've got it, right? And then they've got a good mix of just about everything else, so you don't have to really go looking for a great fight. Just about, again, I don't know. I'd have to look into it. Maybe you can speak to this more than I do. You've been following, who's doing their matchmaking, but they're doing a bang up job, bro. Like you rarely see a Probox fight. Women, men, doesn't matter who's fighting, where you're like, oh well, that was a snooze fest. Nah, man, they're making great fights. And again, it's one of those things where, like, if you just want to get into boxing without having to know everybody's name or the players, it's a great platform. And I just wanted to, take a minute to give them their kudos there, because so many other platforms that we all have come accustomed to watching kind of forget about these lower weight classes. And to me, it's a big injustice because
and they forget about
they're
us,
all
bro.
action.
They forget about us. They forget about the people that are watching the fights. They make it so incredibly inaccessible. And I think that's the thing where Probox has sort of replaced, stumbling into a fight on a cable network, because that doesn't exist any longer, especially in boxing. They've replaced that. They've replaced easily accessible, high quality boxing, especially with Top Rank not being on ESPN and being out of the mix. They're doing a beautiful job of filling that void. And I'm going to hit you with a beautiful segue right here, Nibs. You ready for this? Do you know
Man, I'm waiting.
who, just before he took on Tank Davis, our guy Lamont Roach Jr. was fighting on Probox TV? Literally, the fight before he took on Tank, he didn't get a soft touch. He took a tough fight on Probox against Feargal McCrory and proved his point to get that Tank Davis fight. Now we'll be taking on Isaac Cruz this weekend at 140 pounds. Give me your thoughts on this one, Nibs. I've been going back and forth on this one a little bit. I'm confident in my guy Lamont, but he's never fought at this weight. He was at 130 pounds literally this year, and he is coming off a career best performance. But Isaac Cruz is a big, strong kid. He's got little bricks in them hands. What do you think of this one?
Man, I think anytime you fight Pitbull Cruz, you're in for a hell of a fight. You know what I mean? I don't know anybody who wants to run it back twice with Pitbull, bro. Most people fight him once and they get the fuck on out of
The only
Dodge.
one's Angel Fierro.
Yeah, I mean, but he's half crazy too. You know what I mean? Like you kind of have to question his mental capabilities yeah, for a guy who wants to go twice with Pitbull, right? And then Pitbull for wanting to fight him, vice versa. Both of these guys are nuts. By the way, that was an absolutely wonderful fight. I would watch that again. But with Lamont, it's one of those things where I kind of take it back to the Haney and Garcia fight, right? I didn't think much of Garcia before he fought Haney. I didn't really continue to think too much of him afterwards, but I said, if he can keep that bottled up, whatever he did against Haney bottled up, oh my God, and I think that's what gave him the nod. A lot of people thought, Broly had no chance of beating him because of what he did to Haney. I said, well, hold on, wait a minute. Let's take a look at Lamont Roach, right? Nobody really gave him much of a chance against Tank, but they forget that similar to what Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney had, these guys have history. They fought, endless amounts of times, and not only the amateur ranks, but just in the gym, right? Like these guys have been in the gym with each other. They knew each other. So the fact that he had such a great performance against Tank, is that a one-off because of his relationship boxing wise with Tank? And then we're going to kind of say, okay, well, he should really roll, Pitbull based off of that. So I would caution people because let's be really clear, Pitbull is world class. You know what I'm saying? And you have to bring your lunch pail when you're fighting this dude. And if Lamont Roach isn't, if he's overlooking Pitbull to get to a bigger fight, to his own detriment. But I'll say this: I think it should be on paper should be a great fight. But I would take Pitbull. You're on mute, my guy.
It's also very different styles. Tank is while he's a power puncher and he's aggressive, he's not as much of like a relentless pressure fighter the way that Cruz is. And I think that presents a different challenge in terms of if he's able to assert his size and his physicality into this fight, and it can become, like an Angulo versus Lara, he has a chance. Obviously, Lara won that fight, but if it's that style of fight, I think that does give him a chance. Because, but the other thing too is, it's going to be on Lamont to keep Cruz turning, to keep him off balance. You let Isaac Cruz set his feet, you done fucked up, because he's going to throw, and he's going to throw hard. He's going to throw pretty fast. None of them are going to put your lights out, but they're all going to hurt like shit. But the other thing too is I think that we saw against Ryo and we saw against Tank to some extent that there is a style that Cruz is just not that effective against. And
right.
I think obviously Ryo's fight is the best example of that, and probably the least competitive of Cruz's losses. And I think that Lamont is capable of executing that. I think that he's a smart enough, disciplined enough fighter with just enough pop to keep Cruz turning, to keep him off balance, to keep him behind a jab, and to frustrate him and not give him what he wants. I'm just not sure which one it's going to be.
That's the problem, is because I think Lamont can be drawn into, the brawl, right? He can be drawn into the, okay, well, you pop me, I'm going to try to pop you, now, and then he's going to try to outdo Pitbull at his own game, and I think if you get into that is some deep muddy waters you do not want to even try to wade through with Pitbull Cruz, because even in his losses, right, he's proven he's got a 12 round motor.
Yep.
There's not going to be around 7, 8, 9, 11 where he's tiring out and not coming at you. Even if you could be winning 11 out of the 12 rounds, and in round 12 he can catch you because he's still there like he was in round 1. So I think, yeah, to your point, I think Lamont Roach should try to box the shit out of Isaac Cruz. I think there should be none of that let's ball and put on a good show, even in his mind. And I know that isn't typically what people want to hear or see. They want to see the Rock'em Sock'em Robots, but it's almost impossible to win that kind of fight with Isaac Cruz, because that's what he's built for, bro.
But I do also think there's going to come moments and there's going to come times where he does have to stand his ground and get respect. What's going to be the deciding factor is, does he stay too long? Right? He's got to set his feet. He's got to get respect. He's got to get his, and then he's got to get the fuck out. Even if that's just giving a quick angle, he can't let Cruz get into a you go, I go, because that's where he thrives. And then with Cruz, he'll start punching with you. And I think that's when he catches a lot of these guys off balance. Or I should say he kind of catches them unexpectedly.
He's got great timing on his counter punching, and it's sneaky as shit. You know what I mean? And I want to say that, I mean, yeah, the knockout punches are great, but his body work is vicious. You know what I'm saying? I mean, his body work is, as a lot of Mexican fighters are. Their body work is just,
But he's built for it too.
do.
He's stocky, he's loaded, he's always shorter than the guy. It's really no thing for him to slip under and fucking rip. Like, he's just kind of built to be like a brutal body puncher.
And you'll start to see it with his opponents, right? Around that 6th, 7th round, they want no parts of him being anywhere near their rib cage, bro. So I think that I do think that talent-wise, Lamont Roach is more talented physically. He's got more physical gifts than Isak does. But Isak is a machine, bro. And it's one of those rare things you see in boxing where a guy, win, lose, or draw, he's going to come forward. He's got one thing. But that one thing is a bad motherfucker. You know what I mean? So, and you've got to be prepared to, you know, be the kryptonite. I and I think that if Lamont Roach gets on his horse and can keep Isak at his jab's length, he should win easily. But if he gets into the too many of those pockets where he's, trying to prove something, that's where you put yourself in some danger, and Isak will take full advantage of it.
Bro, let's get into our main event, or my main event, which is O'Shaquie Foster and Stephen Fulton. I'm really excited about this matchup. There was, obviously when this card got rescheduled, it was up in the air if this fight was going to continue on. I'm very happy that it is. But while I go get some water, why don't you give us your initial thoughts on the catch and counter main event?
Look, man, I think, whether you're a diehard fan or if, this being your first time ever watching a fight, I think everybody will agree that this should be the main event. Look, O'Shaquie Foster, he's another one of those guys who got it the hard way, right? He didn't necessarily, have the blue chip stuff that everybody, else has had. He took some lumps along the way, but he's been spectacular, bro. Every turn. He's turned in, some spectacular shit. And Stephen Fulton, man, hats off to him because, after that destruction by, the monster, he's picked himself up. He's not complaining, and he's built himself back up again the hard way. To me, stylistically also, this is a great fight. You know what I mean? And I think that, you know, for me as a betting man, because as has been often too often the case, uh, Oshaki Foster had to prove me to be a complete idiot. Not again. I'm taking shock, bro. And I'm taking him by late round stoppage to boot.
I think I listen, I think it's a great matchup. I also think that Shock is the best 130 pounder in the world right now. If you think there's somebody better, I think that they're gonna have to prove it against him. And so to me, that makes him kind of the real champ. And I think Fulton's a great fighter, man, but it's another weird kind of extra move up in weight that doesn't entirely seem necessary. Like there are a lot of really talented guys down at featherweight that Fulton was primed to get in the mix with, in what I would say was his career best performance in the Figueroa rematch. And so I'm just not really sure what exactly the strategy is on that. Maybe the increase in size will again increase, like we talk about, his explosivity, his reaction time, his chin. Maybe there are things that improve from it, but I think that Shock is going to be able to fight with a type of physicality and will hit harder than anyone, maybe other than Inoue, that Fulton has been in the ring with so far. And as much as I respect Fulton for taking the matchup, I look at that Carlos Castro fight and how much he struggled with that. And I think, if Shock hits him with those same shots, I do think that the consequences are going to be worse.
I mean, let's take a look at that 23-3, right? You got Stephen Fulton coming up. He's 23-1. And let's again give respect due to where it is. Stephen Fulton is 23-1. His only loss is to, one of, if not, the most pound for pound best fighters in the world.
Yep.
And anyway, right? So taking that loss away from him, he's undefeated. You know what I mean? So you have to take that into consideration. But when we're looking at, you know, a guy like Oshaki Foster, I know a lot of people say, well, he lost to Robinson Conceição the first time. If you think he lost that fight, you might want to get your eyes checked. And I think the judges on that fight need to have their eyes checked as well. But you're talking about Conceição. He had, to me, which was a fight of the year contender with Abraham Nova.
Yep.
And if to me, if it hadn't been for that knockdown, probably would have either been a draw or might have been even a close loss there. But again, we're talking about Abraham Nova, who friend of the channel, but is also again world class. Eduardo Hernandez. I mean, we all know what that was.
Love me some Rocky Hernandez, bro.
And Ray Vargas. So we're talking about, again, bro. These are got a lot of people had him. Were picking against him, in all of those fights I just named. Right, except for I think Conceição, most people thought he'd be able to win those, but those other fights, people were picking against him. You know what I mean? I know I picked Nova to beat him. You know what I'm saying? And thought he was until he got knocked down. But I'm here to tell you, bro. It's really hard to pick against a guy who can do it all. He can win in the 12th hour. He can box your ears off. He's got punching power in both his hands, so he can hurt you. He's got everything we want the modern day boxer to be. Oh, and by the way, he's got balls to the wall. Like he's not going to just, he's never been a guy to shy away from action. And I don't know that Stephen Fulton has enough in, in his arsenal as far as boxing skill. Let's be really clear. Stephen Fulton's got plenty of that, but I don't know if he's got enough punch in his punches.
I think there's also like there's a character element to it too. Like Shock has, like the Hernandez fight, he was behind and had to get that stoppage and went out and got. Now, I didn't think he was behind, but the judges did, and that's what matters. And if he hadn't gone out and gotten that knockout, he would have lost the decision. He was not the favorite against Ray Vargas, bro. Ray Vargas was unbeaten.
Right.
He was sort of this long-standing, like it's like he's a tough watch, but he's clearly one of the best. And that wasn't even really a particularly close fight. And Vargas had to go back down to featherweight after that. So I just think that Shock has proved himself to be a certain type of reliable that Fulton hasn't. I think that's going to be the biggest difference for me. And I also think that, you know, Fulton's not going to want it to be a physical fight. And so that's what Shock's going to make it, as a physical fight. The best hope I would say for Fulton, though, it's the one kind of criticism you can give of Shock's game, is sometimes he just gets caught looking a little too much. Like sometimes that is the case. It's why the Hernandez fight was maybe a little closer than it should have been. Some of those rounds against Nova were really close because sometimes he just gets caught looking for a little bit too long.
Taking pitches.
Yeah. Yep. And if Fulton can use that dead air, that dead space, and work in that and pile up points during that time and make Shock play catch up, that's his best bet, I would say. But I also think it's unlikely.
No, I think Shock has learned a little bit of a lesson, bro. You know, I really do think he got robbed the first fight against Conceição. I think that was just
that's one of the worst decisions I've ever seen, bro. Truly.
Yeah. I don't think there was nothing he could have done other than knock Conceição out, which is hard to do. You know, he's a very durable guy. Outside of knocking Conceição out, there was nothing he could have done differently. It was just horrible judging. But when you look at every time he fights, and he has one of those kind of tooth and nail fights, right? He's 1,000% better the next time out. Like with the Nova fight, we saw, you know, there was some, like you said, there was a lot more moments where he got caught taking those pictures. Conceição was all business, right? There was none of that bullshit going on, especially the second time around. Second time around, it was even worse. It was just like, okay, yeah, no, he's not doing any of that fucking funky business with you. He's not just trying to put on a show. He is the show, you know, and that's the scary part for Fulton. I think Fulton has kind of plateaued with his talent, right? He is who he is at this point. I think Shock is getting better, which is crazy to believe this far into his career, but he's even getting better. So, and again, I don't expect this to be a completely one-sided affair. Don't get me wrong. I think Fulton will have his moments, but Shock is a whole different beast, man. And it's one of those things where unless Fulton can, again, like you said, take advantage of moments where maybe Shock does get a little, you know, ahead of himself, or hey, maybe Fulton is better than we think. Maybe he's one of those guys that did need to go up, you know, and let the power carry with him a little bit. And then, you know, you take into consideration his body, because, you know, like you said, like I said, there's really nobody that can outbox Fulton unless your name's, you know, in a way. So I think that, you know, I don't think Shock is going to outbox him, but I think he's going to, it's just going to be too much too early. And then you know, I think he'll get him in the end.
I truly think that Shock is kind of hovering around that pound for pound conversation, and a dominant win here, I think, puts him in that conversation. Certainly, you know, I personally, it's over at Slip and Weave, I do a top 15. I definitely think if he wins this in dominant fashion, he's in that top 15, and he starts making an argument to be in that top 10. I'm not sure if it puts him there, but again, he does continue to just hover right outside of that, you know, the pack of the pound for pound elite of the sport. You know, he's kind of the sixth man.
That kind of to go back to this, but really quick, if Lamont beats Pitbull, do you think he deserves a spot in that top 15, top 10 conversation?
Listen, I already have Lamont in my top 15. I think I have him at 12 right now, and I thought that it was very deserving. You know, that's the keep what you kill school, right? If you beat a pound for pound guy, you become a pound for pound guy, at least for me. Now, if you can't follow that up, you don't stay a pound for pound guy. But if you beat a pound for pound guy, you take the throne. That's how I feel about it. So I think that Lamont is very much in that conversation. Again, literally like a year ago, Lamont versus Shock was the fight that we wanted to see, and we just haven't seen Shock back in the ring. Mostly, I think, because of what's happened with Top Rank, and then also, you know, the first iteration of this card getting canceled, with Keith and Fundora not happening. But yeah, I'm very much looking forward to this one. What do you think about Jesus Ramos and Shane Moseley Jr.? Love that matchup.
I'm here to tell you, man, I have a whole newfound respect for Shane Moseley Jr. You know, after seeing him on the Contender Series, right? Because he could have gone in there with the whole, I'm Shane Moseley Jr. thing, and he didn't. It was, yo, I'm here to work. He took he lost to Brandon Adams, which that loss has aged very well.
It's aging like wine, bro. It's aging like wine.
Right. And I think he's another guy, which is crazy because he could have done this the other way, where he did learn on the job, right? It's crazy to say that against a superstar's kid, but you saw some of those early losses. It was like he was learning on the job, right? And
Sure.
I think he's gotten to a point now where you have to take Shane Moseley Jr. serious, my guy. Like, he is not a pushover. He's not going to be one of these guys where you just come in there and, hey, I'm about to get a really big name on my ledger the easy way. So all that being said, I will be picking against him in this fight, but I will say this though, bro, it would not surprise me if he gets out of there with a dub. From what I've seen from him grow since the Contender Series, hey man, I'm here to fuck with you, bro. I tell you, he earned my respect. I'll just put it that way. But I think it's a little bit too much, and I think it's a little too late for him in the game to be getting finally on the horse. I think if he'd have hit this stride maybe right before the Contender Series, maybe we'd be having a different conversation. But yeah, I still think it's water's still a little bit too deep for him.
And listen, I truly think that potentially Jesus is like a Bam Rodriguez style generational talent. I think that that's really possible, and that's not, to say anything bad about Shane Jr., who I'm a huge fan of. I mean, like you said, the growth for a guy, coming from the son of a legend to take the path that he's taken, there was a much more pampered Conor Benz style path that he could have taken, and that's not what he did. He's consistently fought tough opposition and has been very flawed in a lot. I think about the Jason Quigley fight. He was very hittable in that fight. There's been fights where it's not quite all been put together. And then you see the Gabe Rosado performance, and you see the Demetrius Ballard stoppage, and you see the fight with Danny Jacobs, and it's all very impressive. I think the biggest thing for me, other than Jesus being a generational talent, is that fight with Danny Jacobs. I'm looking on Boxer. It was July of 2024. It's a lot of inactivity to be getting in with a young lion, a young stud like Jesus Ramos.
I think some of that has to do with fights falling through, and promotion.
Absolutely. But but a year and a half is a year and a half.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't want to use that as a scapegoat for just him because he's the name fighter. I think Shock, we were talking about Shock earlier. I think a lot of his inactivity. I think a lot of boxers, especially a lot of these younger guys, right? That's another thing too. People forget Shane Moseley Jr. is still pretty young, relatively, but
I think he's 33 or 34. He's not an old man, and he hasn't gotten beat up too much.
Right. And I would say he's young in his career. Like he doesn't have 50, 60 fights. Sure. You know what I'm saying? When you look at, some of these guys that are in that 25 to 35 range, that 10-year gap where they want to put on the gas, right? They want to get these fights going. You talked about it, a couple of series ago where, we're just in an era where there's not a lot of room for these fights to happen, and a lot of them are falling out because the promoters just don't have the deals in place or the money in place, or the guys fall out for whatever reason maybe. You know, and it hurts some of these guys' careers, especially a guy like a Shane Moseley, where he needs that activity, right? He needs those fights all, back to back to back like that. And I think you're right. I mean, that the inactivity plus, I mean, when you fighting a guy, who's a guy, we're all expecting him to ascend, to a certain place. We're looking at it going, all right, man, Shane. Now, if Shane wins this fight, shit, go ahead
That's
and
a
get that man a
badass
title
win.
fight next.
Yeah, that's a
If
badass win.
if Shane fucks around and wins this fight, go ahead and give him a title shot, bro. That would be, I would say, go ahead.
We got a couple minutes left here. It was announced, I think yesterday, that January 31st we'll get Shakur Stevenson versus Teofimo Lopez at 140 pounds in my hometown in New York City. Love to see that. Love this matchup. I'm so glad to finally see this crop of talent like starting to fight each other. It feels like everyone older and everyone younger has been making good matchups, and like this crop of guys in their late 20s just never had the fights. But this is one of the fights. And I got a lot of respect to both guys for taking it. My first instinct on this fight was that it's Floyd versus Judah. Like, I think that with Shakur being the Floyd and Teo being the Zab, I think that it's going to be a really dynamic, interesting fight for about 6 rounds. And then I think the guy with the greater attention span, the more reliable guy who's able to carry a game plan out for 12 rounds consistently, will take over in the back half and pull away pretty convincingly. But what are your initial thoughts of this matchup?
That's a, you're pretty good at this. I tell you what, that's a
I'm
pretty that's
saying?
pretty spot on. You know, um, I can't come up with a better, fight analogy than that. I would say that, for me, Teo's always been the guy who's like he's super hit, kind of miss, depending on what version of him shows up. But I'll say this, man, it's going to be entertaining as shit. I'll tell you that. At least for my money, on
It,
paper,
it
it
might
should
be.
be.
Listen, it might be. I also think that Shakur could win a 12-0 stinker against Teofimo Lopez on any given night. I'll be honest. And the reason I
Yeah.
say it's Floyd versus Zab is they have similar athletic abilities and talents, but it's the IQ and the mental reliability from Shakur that I think would be the difference. I think that Shakur could hurt one of his hands and win a stinker. Like, I can't. It's tough for me to see a world where Teofimo Lopez is able to be reliable in that way when he couldn't do it against Sandor Martin. When he couldn't do it against Jermaine Ortiz. I don't think he can do it against Shakur. Now, if he does, that's a career defining moment where you become great. But that's why I think it's Floyd versus Zab. I just think that Shakur is able to maintain it in a way that Teo's not.
I mean, I'm not going to argue. It would just be one. It'd be ridiculous to argue who has the better boxing skill in this fight, right? I think we can all kind of put that on the Shakur side of things. But when it comes to pure athleticism, I don't think you get more athletic than a guy like Teofimo Lopez, right? And that's what makes this such an interesting fight, is because just like you said with the Zab and the Floyd comparison, both of them were kind of on the same level as far as boxing skill
Just pure
at that time.
talent. Yep.
At that time, and I think that gets overlooked. Although a lot of people will say I'm crazy, but people have to don't forget that Zab had been boxing since he was just as long as Floyd had been at that point, and I think he was a little he was the more powerful guy, just naturally athletic, but Floyd figured it out, and that's what you're expecting. With Shakur is he's going to figure it out. He's got the cerebral part down pat, right? But if Teo can disrupt it enough, right, kind of like what Maidana did against Floyd the first time around, don't give him exactly what he's expecting, right? And throw punches from crazy different angles. You make it a little bit more difficult. Shakur might still win that fight, right? But it'll be much more interesting. I think that's kind of what Teo brings to the table, where Not all of these punches are going to come from the angle Shakur is expecting them to, right?
Yeah.
And Teo's athletic enough to pull them off.
But he's
You know,
gotten frustrated so many times in these fights where he's fighting more technical type guys. Like you can see
yeah,
him mentally start to give. And I just listen, Sandor Martin and Jermaine Ortiz, those are all great fighters. But now we're talking about the elite of that style. And that's the style that bothers him. You know, and even George Kambosos, what is the one thing George does well? Counterpunch. And Teo gave him all the opportunity in the world to counterpunch and got hit all fucking night. So and to me, I have a different kind of view of Teofimo. I think that he's an incredible talent, but he could easily have 5-6 losses on his record, bro. Like he's gotten grace and the benefit of the doubt so many times, man. And I think now he has earned his spot, right? He did legitimately beat Barbosa. He did legitimately beat Josh Taylor. And the Barbosa fight was one that I didn't expect at all. And so that's where I think, maybe there is a wild card chance that he can win this fight. It's not out of the question. He's talented enough to do it. But there's nothing other than the Barbosa fight that tells me that he has any chance in this fight.
I thought he lost to Sandor Martin. And
Yeah,
I'm on
that's
record
what I'm
saying
saying. I
that
think
before.
easily
Yeah,
he could be 17-5 easily.
yeah. I think as a matter of fact, I think when me and Jack covered did the post fight after that, I said I think Sandor Martin should legitimately protest that because I thought it was really bad. I thought it was really bad. I was like, what are we doing? Just because he's the name. But with that being said, it's one of those things where that's what kind of makes Teofimo so interesting to watch is because you don't know what version of him you're going to get. If we get the fight that a guy that fought Josh, if we get the guy that fought Barboza, if we get the guy that was ready for Lomachenko, right? Then this can be a really great fight, or it could be like you said, it could be a snoozer because I do think Teo has the ability to be a technical, like I think he's got the skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he wants to put on the show. He wants the other guy to engage. The thing is, you're not gonna get that with Shakur, bro. So he's got to if he's going to make this an entertaining fight and or a Teo fight, he's got to figure out a way to draw that out of Shakur Stevenson, which is going to be a task in itself.
Nibs, let the people know why it's so important to support local boxing.
Well, we were just talking about this, earlier. And that's why I had you repeat that young man's record is, again, we're talking about a guy who started off his career 2-5, right? Who probably didn't have at that time in those first seven fights the support that he needed, right? And then guess what? It came, right? It might have come slowly, but it came. And then, you end up on Probox TV at 24-7. Probably got some L's in there that you probably still should have went your way, right? Well, you completely the support of not only your family, your friends, but a local community can change the entire trajectory of a fighter's career in and outside of the ring, right? How many times have guys not had the support that they need when the show is over? We never hear from them before, and then we hear some tragedy happen, or they got into you know whatever world they got into, and it just didn't work, right? And so I think that support, people have to understand it isn't just the day they show up in their boxing trunks and they're ready to fight. You also have to be there. There has to be some level of support, not only from their community, but from uh the people surrounding them. I want to give you guys a quote, to kind of wrap this up, from one of the greatest fighters of all time, Manny Pacquiao. He said, "All those who are around me are the bridge to my success, so they are all important." That kind of sums up supporting local boxing, bro. Fuck with us or fuck off, man. Catch and counter, baby.
Hell of a show, my friend. We will catch you guys next week. Much appreciated. Peace.